Putin knew how this was going to play out 3 years ago, he would have never gone into Ukraine. He did not expect the Ukrainians to fight. He did not expect us to do what we did, us being the Europeans and Americans, supporting Ukraine so broadly with weapons, or the sanctions against Russia. So there's a real chance that this containment can work.
Envoy Steve Witkoff met the Russian President Vladimir Putin for 3 hours in Moscow today to discuss the American plan to end the war in Ukraine, and the Kremlin said the two sides' positions had moved closer. A Kremlin foreign policy aide, Yuri Ushakov, who took part in the meeting, described it as constructive and very useful. Well, shortly after the get-together in Moscow ended, Trump said he hadn't been briefed on the talks, but heard that his envoy and Putin had, quotes, a pretty good meeting. Well, James Jeffrey is a former US diplomat and Deputy National Security Advisor. James, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
It's good to talk to you again. We hear that the Kremlin feels that the two sides, as in the US and the Russian sides, positions had moved closer. What do you deduce from that?
It's always tricky in dealing with the Russians on something as critically important to them as Ukraine, which is also critically important to the US, the Europeans, and obviously Ukraine. But Putin has two goals. The real goal, of course, is to take all of Ukraine as part of recreating Russia as a great power equivalent to the Soviet Union. But what we have seen in many conflicts that end, rather like the outline of this one may end, in a compromise. Korea in '53, Bosnia in 1995, what we were doing in Syria for a long time until, surprisingly, Assad fell, is to give each side the minimum they need. Putin needs to say that he got something. That is apparently, in Trump's mind, Crimea, and also that Ukraine will never join NATO. Now, the point is, neither of these things are something that we can really hold back, because the Russians are never going to give up Crimea. And ever since 2008, we were clear indirectly that Ukraine would never get in NATO. But nonetheless, they are chips on the table. In return, Putin will be able to say that NATO will never threaten Russia again. It was never a threat, but that was Putin's basically big lie. And so he can settle for that for the moment. It won't be over, and the question is how to secure Ukraine in the long term. But for the moment, this is a possible way forward to end the killing.
Yeah, but we know what concessions Ukraine is having to make, but what do they get? I mean, you heard Trump when he was asked this in the Oval Office. He says, well, Russia not taking over the whole of Ukraine, that's a pretty big concession. I mean, what kind of thinking is that?
That's smart thinking. That's what you do in the real world when you're dealing with military situations, and you scrape away all of the moral posturing and you get to the reality. Right now, neither side is winning, but almost all military analysis are that unless the Putin regime collapses, and showing no sign of that, slowly but surely they can bring about Ukraine's collapse militarily. So therefore, getting them to stop halfway is a plus. That's the main thing, and Trump is absolutely right. Again, it's not a question of morality. The morality is on the side of Ukraine. It's the question of, are we going to go to war, the United States and NATO European troops, to stop Putin and push him back? We're not. So what are we going to do to try to end this thing and preserve what we need, which is a Ukraine that is safe, secure, and can serve, as it is doing now, as a bulwark against further Russian expansion?
Well, the question is, how safe and secure is Ukraine? I mean, I'm looking at the Daily Telegraph for Saturday morning here in the UK, and the headline, well, the first paragraph, it says this: the US has privately offered to provide security guarantees for Sir Keir Starmer's coalition of the willing, the Daily Telegraph understands. They don't give us a great amount of detail, but they say US officials have opened the door to giving intelligence and logistical support for British and European soldiers to back up a Ukraine peace deal from land, air and sea. What do you think of that?
I was expecting that all along. I'm glad that it's confirmed. But look, this is a reality as seen in Washington. We've been involved in two major and a number of minor wars that didn't turn out well. Both of them with our British colleagues fighting with us. And secondly, we have a huge threat from China. Now, Ukraine, although it's only a quarter of the size of Russia, has done a pretty good job holding off the Russian army from overthrowing it, and Ukraine has created an army of about 1 million troops. There's no reason why Europe, with a GDP as large as ours, and with more troops under arms, about 2 million, than either Russia or the United States has, cannot, along with Ukraine and its 1 million troops, with a lot of American support, be a functional and effective deterrent to contain Russian military moves. It's very different. If Putin knew how this was going to play out 3 years ago, he would have never gone into Ukraine. He did not expect the Ukrainians to fight. He did not expect us to do what we did, us being the Europeans and Americans, supporting Ukraine so broadly with weapons, or the sanctions against Russia. So there's a real chance that this containment can work.
Well, is that true, James? Because you hear from nearly every commentator worth their salt that this will not be enough for Putin. You said earlier that the real goal is to occupy the whole of Ukraine, so it's part of a greater Russia. So despite the fact that he's lost 800,000 troops, both dead and wounded, and he's taken just 19-20% of Ukraine, and the economy's being hammered, do you think that's deterrent enough? Or will he really come back for more? Because many people say, well, he's surely going to.
No, it isn't determined enough. And right after it began, I wrote a piece and published it that we should put troops in Ukraine right behind the Ukrainian lines and be ready to fight for Ukraine. That's what we should have done, like we did in Korea, like we did in Kuwait in 1990. But we did not. Neither the United States nor the Europeans had the stomach to fight Russia in Ukraine. Given that, the question is, what is the best that can come out of this for the Ukrainians and for us? Not how we can best punish Russia, because we gave that up a long time ago. I know many of these experts. I've served with many of them here in America. And they're playing with fire because they'll fight to the very last Ukrainian. And Trump fears, A, that that's going to cost him a lot of money, which it will, and B, in the end, the very last Ukrainian will go down.
But if you're a leader who's got autocratic tendencies and you look at parts of the world, perhaps in your backyard, that used to be part of your own country, and you want them back, surely you'll have been encouraged by the way in which the US has led these negotiations into thinking, well, they allowed Russia to get away with it, and they don't want to put their own troops in harm's way. Why don't we go for it? For example, a small place called Taiwan.
Oh, wait a second. But that's not a surprise. It isn't that Joe Biden had 150,000 troops fighting next to the Ukrainians and Trump's threatening to pull them out. Putin was certainly encouraged by the fact that we didn't put troops in and stop this thing by essentially global war against Russia, with all that might portend. But on the other hand, he also sees that Ukraine, if backed by the West, just with equipment, let alone British, French, and other European troops on the ground supported by the United States, as you just mentioned, he has a very hard time moving forward militarily. That may make him think again. Remember, he did want to gobble up the whole country. That's why he went directly for the capital, Kiev, in the first hours of the war. It didn't work, and he's had a very tough time. He can do it if he has to, if he has no other choice, but I don't think he wants to at this point. I think he would like to wait and see what will happen. You might get a more pacifistic president than Trump, but you might get a more aggressive one who decides that he or she will put troops on the ground along with Europeans.
All right. James, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's James Jeffrey, former US diplomat and Deputy National Security Advisor.